My name is Devin Hutchins. 12 days ago, I was flipping burgers at a Nebraska truck stop. Then Yellowstone erupted and triggered an ice age apocalypse that killed millions. Now I'm the only thing keeping 17 strangers alive in sub-zero temperatures with dwindling food supplies and no rescue coming. I had to make impossible choices about who lives and who dies using nothing but fast food experience and determination. This is how I survived the first 12 days when the world froze over. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Devin Hutchins, and 12 days ago, I thought my biggest problem was training another teenager who couldn't work the fryer without setting off the smoke alarm. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Because 12 days ago, the world ended, and somehow I became the only thing standing between 17 strangers and freezing to death in what used to be Nebraska. Let me take you back to October 3rd, 2025. It was a Thursday morning, and I was doing what I'd done every Thursday morning for the past 6 years at the Interstate 80 truck stop diner. I arrived at 5:30 in the morning to open up, just like always. The coffee machines needed cleaning, the grill needed prepping, and I had to check our inventory before the morning rush hit. You have to understand something about truck stops. They're not just gas stations with bad food. They're the lifeblood of America's supply chain. Every single thing you've ever bought in a store, every piece of food you've ever eaten, every product you've ever used, it all moved through places like mine. Truckers don't just stop for fuel. They stop for information, for rest, for connection. Our little diner was positioned right at the junction of Interstate 80 and Highway 30, which meant we saw drivers heading everywhere from coast to coast. That morning started like any other. I fired up the grill, started the first pot of coffee, and began my routine. The early birds started trickling in around 6. There was Martha, who drove medical supplies between Denver and Chicago. There was Big Jim, who hauled automotive parts from Detroit to California. There was Carlos, who transported frozen goods across the Midwest. These weren't just customers to me. After 6 years, they were family. By 7 o'clock, we had our usual crowd. The morning shift was always the same faces, the same orders, the same conversations about road conditions and delivery schedules. I was restocking the coffee station when I heard the bell above the door chime. That's when Jake Morrison walked in. Jake wasn't supposed to be here. He ran long hauls between Seattle and Miami, and his route never brought him through Nebraska. But there he was, looking like he'd been driving all night, his face pale and his hands shaking as he fumbled with his phone. "Dev," he called out, his voice cracking. "Dev, you need to see this." Everyone in the diner turned to look at him. Jake was one of those guys who never got rattled. 20 years on the road, he'd seen everything. Accidents, storms, riots, you name it. But standing there in my diner, holding his phone like it was about to explode, he looked terrified. "What's going on, Jake?" I asked, walking over to him. "Yellowstone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yellowstone just blew up." At first, nobody believed him. I mean, how could we? Yellowstone was a national park. It had geysers and hot springs and tourists taking pictures of buffalo. It didn't just blow up. But Jake held up his phone, and there it was on the screen. A mushroom cloud rising from what used to be Wyoming, stretching so high into the sky, it looked like it was reaching for space. The footage was shaky, obviously, taken from a car or helicopter, but you could see the devastation. Where Yellowstone National Park used to be, there was just fire and smoke and ash. The person filming was screaming something about the ground shaking and the sky turning black. The video cut out after 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds changed everything. "When did this happen?" I asked Jake. "About 2 hours ago," he said. "I was in Colorado when the emergency broadcast started. They're saying it's a supervolcanic eruption." They're saying it's never happened before in recorded history. Big Jim laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. Come on, Jake, you're talking about a volcano in Wyoming. What's that got to do with us here in Nebraska? Jake looked at him like he was crazy. Jim, you don't understand. This isn't just any volcano. This is the Yellowstone supervolcano. My grandfather used to tell me stories about the year without summer back in 1816. That was just a regular volcano in Indonesia. This is 1,000 times bigger. That's when I felt the first chill run down my spine. Not because of what Jake was saying, but because of how he was saying it. Jake Morrison had been driving trucks for 2 decades. He'd hauled loads through hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, and ice storms. He'd seen floods that washed out entire highways and droughts that turned farmland into dust bowls. But I'd never seen him scared before. What exactly did your grandfather tell you about 1816? I asked. Jake sat down heavily at the counter. He called it the year without summer. A volcano erupted in Indonesia and threw so much ash into the atmosphere that it blocked out the sun. Crops failed all over the world. People starved. The temperature dropped so much that it snowed in July. In July, Dev, and that was just one volcano. The diner got quiet, really quiet. Even the coffee makers seemed to stop gurgling. But that was over 200 years ago, Martha said. We have better technology now. Better farming, better transportation, better everything. Jake shook his head. Technology doesn't matter when there's no sun. Technology doesn't matter when the temperature drops 30 degrees and stays there. And technology definitely doesn't matter when the roads are impassable and the power grids fail. I wanted to tell Jake he was overreacting. I wanted to laugh it off and get back to work. But something in his voice, something in the way he kept looking at his phone like he was expecting more bad news, made me listen. Jake, I said carefully, what exactly are you hearing on the radio? He pulled out his CB radio and set it on the counter. The static was louder than usual, but you could make out voices. Truckers talking to each other, reporting what they were seeing on the roads. And what they were seeing wasn't good. I've got ash falling in Denver, came a voice through the static. Visibility is down to maybe 50 feet. They're telling everyone to stay indoors. Copy that, Denver, came another voice. I'm seeing the same thing in Colorado Springs. The interstate is starting to get slick. It's like driving on wet concrete. Salt Lake City reporting in, came a third voice. The sky is black as midnight, and it's only noon. Temperature has dropped 15 degrees in the past hour. I listened to the radio chatter for maybe 10 minutes, and with each report, the knot in my stomach got tighter. These weren't panicked civilians calling in false reports. These were professional drivers, people who spent their lives on the road, people who knew the difference between a bad storm and something catastrophic. Dev, Jake said quietly, I need you to understand something. I've been driving for 20 years, and I've never heard anything like this. The drivers coming from the west, they're all reporting the same thing. Ash, falling temperatures, visibility near zero. And the ones who were closest to Yellowstone, they're not reporting anything at all. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the diner was staring at Jake, waiting for him to say something that would make this all make sense. Something that would turn this back into a normal Thursday morning. Instead, Jake stood up and walked to the window. He stared out at the parking lot, at the interstate beyond, at the normal-looking sky that still had a few puffy white clouds drifting across it. I was supposed to deliver a load to Miami by Saturday, he said, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here until I know what's happening. Jake, come on, Big Jim said. You can't just abandon your route because of some bad weather in Wyoming. Jake turned around, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, honest-to-God fear. Jim, this isn't bad weather. This is the end of the world as we know it. And if I'm right, if this is really what I think it is, then This truck stop might be the safest place between here and the Atlantic Ocean. That's when I knew Jake wasn't overreacting. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Because in 20 years of driving, Jake Morrison had never missed a delivery. Never. He'd driven through ice storms that closed entire states. He'd navigated around forest fires and floods and civil unrest. But he'd never just stopped and said. He wasn't going anywhere. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. More truckers started arriving, all of them coming from the west, all of them carrying the same stories. Ash falling like snow, temperatures dropping fast, radio stations going off the air. And with each new arrival, the picture got clearer and scarier. By noon, we had maybe 20 people in the diner, and nobody was talking about leaving. They were all glued to their phones, trying to get news, trying to reach family, trying to figure out what was happening. But the cell towers were overloaded, and most calls weren't going through. I kept the coffee coming and the grill running, but my mind was racing. 6 years of working in food service had taught me a lot about people. When people are scared, they need routine. They need something normal to hold on to. So I kept doing what I always did. I took orders, I served food, I cleaned tables, and I pretended like everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I stepped outside to check on the generators, and I saw it. A thin haze on the western horizon, like smoke from a distant fire. Except there were no fires in western Nebraska. There was nothing but farmland and small towns for hundreds of miles. I stood there in the parking lot, staring at that haze, and I felt something I'd never felt before. The absolute certainty that everything I'd known, everything I'd planned, for everything I'd taken for granted, was about to change forever. When I came back inside, Jake was huddled over his CB radio with 3 other drivers. They were talking in low voices, but I caught pieces of their conversation. Wyoming's completely cut off, one of them was saying. No communication, no traffic, nothing. I heard from a guy in Montana, another said. He said the ash is 3 feet deep in some places. 3 feet, Jake. How do you drive through 3 feet of ash? You don't, Jake said simply. You don't. Drive through it, you don't fly over it, and you don't walk around it. You wait. Wait for what? The first driver asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low I had to strain to hear him. You wait to see if this is just the beginning or if it's the end of everything. The afternoon dragged on, and more people kept arriving. Not just truckers now, but regular travelers who'd been caught on the interstate when the news broke. Families trying to get home, business travelers trying to get to meetings, college students trying to get back to school. All of them stranded, all of them scared, all of them looking for answers that none of us had. By 4 o'clock, the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. That might not sound like much, but in Nebraska in early October, it was noticeable. The kind of drop that made you think about changing seasons, about getting out your winter clothes, about making sure your heating system was working. By 6 o'clock, it had dropped another 5 degrees, and that thin haze on the western horizon had gotten thicker. You could see it now without squinting, a gray smudge that seemed to be moving closer. By 8 o'clock, when I should have been getting ready to close up and head home, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees from where it had been that morning, and the first flakes of ash were starting to fall. Not snow, ash, gray, powdery ash that coated everything it touched and made the air smell like sulfur and burning wood. I stood in the doorway of the diner, watching the ash fall, and I made a decision that probably saved my life and the lives of everyone else in that building. I wasn't going home. I wasn't closing the diner. I was staying right where I was. Jake, I called out. How many people do we have in here? He looked around, counting. 17, including you. How much food do we have? Why? He asked. But I could see in his eyes that he already knew why. Because, I said, I don't think any of us are going anywhere for a while. That night, as the ash continued to fall and the temperature continued to drop, I realized that my 6 years of managing a truck stop diner had prepared me for something I'd never imagined. Not just serving food to hungry travelers, but keeping people alive when the world started falling apart. I spent the night taking inventory, checking our supplies, and trying to figure out how long we could hold out. The diner had been built to handle the unexpected. We had backup generators, emergency supplies, and enough food to feed a small army. But 17 people eating 3 meals a day was different from serving coffee and sandwiches to passing truckers. As I worked through the night, listening to the ash tap against the windows like rain, I kept thinking about what Jake had said. About the year without summer. About crops failing and people starving. About technology not mattering when there was no sun. By dawn on October 4th, the ash had stopped falling, but the damage was done. The parking lot was covered in a gray film that looked like concrete dust. The cars and trucks looked like they'd been abandoned in a construction zone. And the sky, which should have been blue and clear, was the color of old pewter. But it was the temperature that really got my attention. It was 28 degrees in Nebraska. In October. That was cold enough to freeze water, cold enough to kill crops, cold enough to make you think about survival instead of just getting through another day. I stood at the window, watching the sun try to break through the gray sky, and I realized that Jake had been right. This wasn't just bad weather. This was the beginning of something much worse. And as the 17th person in my diner, I had just become responsible for keeping 16 other people alive in a world that was about to get very cold and very dangerous very fast. The radio crackled to life, and I heard a voice I didn't recognize. A trucker somewhere east of us, reporting that the ash clouds were moving, that the temperature was dropping everywhere, that the interstate was becoming impassable. That's when I knew that everything Jake's grandfather had told him about the year without summer was about to become our reality. Except this time, it wasn't going to be just 1 year. This time, it was going to be the beginning of a new ice age. And I was about to find out if 6 years of flipping burgers and managing dinner rushes had prepared me to keep 17 people alive at the end of the world. If you're just joining this story, I'm Devin, and I'm telling you about the first 12 days after Yellowstone erupted and triggered what the scientists are calling a volcanic winter. We're now on day 3, and that's when things started getting really weird. October 5th dawned gray and cold, colder than any October morning I'd ever experienced in Nebraska. The thermometer outside the diner read 24 degrees, and the sky looked like someone had stretched dirty concrete across the horizon. The ash had stopped falling during the night, but it left everything coated in a fine gray powder that made the world look like an old black and white photograph. I'd been up most of the night, going through our inventory and trying to figure out how long our supplies would last. The diner was well stocked because we served truckers around the clock, but feeding 17 people 3 meals a day was different from serving coffee and sandwiches to travelers passing through. My calculations weren't encouraging, but I kept them to myself. No point in panicking anyone yet. Jake was up early too, hunched over his CB radio at the counter, trying to raise other drivers on the road. The static was worse than it had been the day before, and the voices that came through were getting more desperate. Any traffic on Interstate 80 eastbound? Jake called into the radio, static, then a weak voice. This is Hammer Down hauling auto parts. I'm stuck about 50 miles west of you. Roads completely blocked by abandoned vehicles. People just left their cars and started walking. Walking where? Jake asked. That's the thing, the voice crackled back. Nobody knows. They're just walking east, carrying whatever they can. Hundreds of them. It's like something out of a disaster movie. I felt my stomach drop. People abandoning their cars meant the roads were impassable. People walking, they were desperate. Enough to risk freezing to death rather than staying put. And people walking east meant they were heading our way. Any word from the authorities? Jake asked. Negative. Radio stations are going off the air one by one. Last I heard, they were calling it a national emergency and telling everyone to shelter in place. But that was yesterday. Haven't heard anything official since. Jake signed off and looked at me. Dev, we need to talk outside. We stepped out into the parking lot, and I immediately understood why people were abandoning their cars. The ash wasn't just coating everything. It was getting into everything. The engines, the air filters, the electronics. 3 of the vehicles in our lot wouldn't start, and the ones that did were running rough and smoking. It's not just the cold, Jake said, reading my thoughts. The ash is like powdered glass. It's destroying everything mechanical it touches. Cars, trucks, generators, anything with moving parts. What about our backup generators? I asked. I checked them this morning. They're still running, but the air filters are clogged already. We've got maybe 3 days before they start failing if we don't find replacement filters. 3 days. That was the first real timeline I'd heard since this whole thing started. 3 days before we lost power, heat, and refrigeration. 3 days before we went from being a functioning truck stop to being just another building full of scared people trying not to freeze to death. There's something else, Jake said. I've been listening to the radio all night. The drivers who were further west than us, the ones who were closer to Yellowstone, they're not reporting in anymore. At first I thought it was just radio problems, but now I'm thinking it's something worse. What do you mean? I mean, I think they're dead, Dev. The ash clouds, the temperature drops, the toxic gases that come out of volcanoes. I think everyone within a few hundred miles of Yellowstone is gone. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Gone, not evacuated, not relocated, gone, dead. Millions of people just gone. How do you know? I don't know for sure. But think about it. We're 600 miles from Yellowstone, and look what's happening here. The temperature has dropped 25 degrees in 2 days. The ash is destroying vehicles. The sky looks like the end of the world. Now imagine what it's like 100 miles from ground zero. I didn't want to imagine it. I couldn't imagine it. The scale of what Jake was describing was too big, too horrible to wrap my mind around. We need to get everyone together, I said. We need to tell them what's happening. Are you sure? Once we tell them, there's no going back. Right now, most of them still think this is temporary, that help is coming, that things will get back to normal in a few days. Once we tell them the truth, that's when the panic starts. I looked back at the diner, at the warm yellow light coming through the windows, at the people inside who were probably drinking coffee and checking their phones and wondering when they'd be able to get back on the road. 17 people who had no idea that the world they knew had ended 2 days ago. Jake, I spent 6 years learning how to manage people under pressure. Dinner rushes, equipment failures, supply shortages, angry customers, you name it. The one thing I learned is that people handle the truth better than they handle lies. They might not like the truth, but they can work with it. Lies just make everything worse. Jake nodded slowly. You're right. But Dev, you need to understand something. Once you tell them what's really happening, you're not just the guy who makes their coffee anymore. You're the guy who's keeping them alive. And that's a responsibility that's going to get heavier every day. We went back inside, and I gathered everyone around the main seating area. 17 faces looking at me expectantly, waiting for me. To tell them that the roads were clearing, that the ash was just a temporary problem, that they'd be back on their way by the end of the day. Instead, I told them the truth. I need everyone to sit down, I said. We need to talk about what's happening, and it's not good news. I explained what Jake had told me about volcanic winters, about the year without summer, about what happened. when massive amounts of ash got thrown into the atmosphere. I explained about the temperature drops, about the crop failures, about the infrastructure collapse that was probably already happening across the country. The bottom line is this, I said. We're not going anywhere for a while. The roads are impassable, the vehicles are breaking down, and the temperature is going to keep dropping. We're stuck here, and we need to figure out how to survive. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the disbelief on their faces, the denial, the desperate hope that I was wrong. But I could also see the fear starting to creep in, as they realized that everything I was saying made sense. Martha, the medical supply driver, was the first to speak. How long are we talking about? A few days? A week? I don't know, I said. Jake's grandfather talked about the year without summer lasting 18 months, and that was from a much smaller eruption. This could be years. Years? Big Jim stood up, his face red with anger. You're talking about years? Are you out of your mind? The government won't let this happen. They'll send help. They'll evacuate us. They'll fix this. With what? Jake asked quietly. Jim, think about what Dev just told you. The ash is destroying vehicles. The temperature is dropping everywhere. The power grids are failing. The government is dealing with the same problems we are, except they're dealing with them on a scale of 300 million people. But we can't just stay here, said a woman named Linda who'd been traveling with her teenage daughter. We have families, jobs, lives. We can't just abandon everything. Ma'am, I said, I understand what you're saying. But right now, staying. Here's the only option that doesn't involve freezing to death on the side of the road. We have shelter, we have heat, we have food. That's more than most people have right now. How much food? Asked Carlos, the frozen goods driver. How long can we actually last? That was the question I'd been dreading. I'd done the math, and the numbers weren't good. But I'd also learned something during my years in food service. When people are scared, they need honest information, but they also need hope. We have enough food for about 2 weeks if we're careful, I said. But we're not going to just sit here and wait for it to run out. We're going to figure out how to make it last longer, how to find more, how to survive. How? Big Jim demanded. How are we going to find more food when we can't even leave the building? Because, I said, this isn't just a truck stop. It's a supply depot. We're sitting at the intersection of 2 major highways, surrounded by farmland, with storage facilities and distribution centers within 50 miles. I've been working here for 6 years, and I know where everything is. I know which warehouses have emergency supplies, which farms have grain silos, which distribution centers have backup generators. It was partly true. I did know the area, and I did know where a lot of supplies were stored. But I also knew that getting to those supplies was going to be nearly impossible in the current conditions. Still, people needed hope, and hope was what I was going to give them. The first thing we need to do is establish a routine, I said. Jake, you're in charge of communications. Keep monitoring the radio. Try to establish contact with other survivors. Gather information about what's happening outside. Martha, you said you have medical training. You're our medic. Carlos, you know refrigeration systems. You're in charge of keeping our food storage working as long as possible. I went around the group, assigning roles based on people's skills and experience. The teenage girl, Amanda, was good with computers and phones, so she became our information coordinator. Her mother, Linda, had been a teacher, so she became our education coordinator, responsible for keeping everyone's spirits up and maintaining some sense of normalcy. But even as I assigned roles and tried to sound confident, I could feel the weight of what was happening settling on my shoulders. These people were looking to me for leadership, for answers, for hope. And I was just a 24-year-old guy who made coffee and flipped burgers for a living. The 3rd day passed slowly. The temperature continued to drop, falling to 20 degrees by evening. The ash clouds on the horizon got thicker and darker, and we started seeing them moving in our direction. The radio chatter got sparser and more desperate, with fewer voices reporting in and more reports of abandoned vehicles and people walking aimlessly through the ash-covered landscape. But the worst part was the silence. The absence of normal sounds. No traffic on the interstate. No planes overhead. No sirens in the distance. Just the wind carrying ash and the occasional crackle of the radio. That night, as I was doing another inventory check, Amanda came up to me with her phone in her hand. "Dev, I've been trying to get online all day, but I finally got a weak signal. I found something you need to see." She showed me a news article from a European website. The headline: "Read, Yellowstone eruption triggers global climate emergency." The article talked about ash clouds circling the globe, about temperature drops being recorded in every major city, about crop failures and infrastructure collapse happening worldwide. "It's not just us," Amanda said quietly. "It's everywhere. The whole world is dealing with this." I read through the article, and my heart sank. The scientists were predicting a global temperature drop of 10 to 15 degrees that could last for years. They were talking about mass starvation, about the collapse of modern civilization, about a new ice age that could kill billions of people. "Amanda," I said, "I need you to promise me something. Don't show this to anyone else." "Not yet. People are scared enough already." "But they have a right to know," she said. "They do. But they also need to stay functional. If we tell them that the whole world is collapsing, some of them are going to give up. And we can't afford to have anyone give up." She nodded reluctantly, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear that was growing in my chest like a cold knot. On the fourth day, October 6th, everything changed. The temperature dropped to 18 degrees, and the ash clouds finally reached us. Not just a thin haze this time, but thick, choking clouds that turned day into night and made it impossible to see more than a few feet outside the windows. The backup generators started struggling, coughing and sputtering as the ash clogged their air intake systems. The power flickered on and off throughout the day, and I realized that Jake had been optimistic when he said we had 3 days. We were going to lose power much sooner than that. But the real crisis came when Big Jim decided he'd had enough. "This is insane," he announced to the group. "We're sitting here waiting to die when we should be trying to get home to our families. I'm leaving. Anyone who wants to come with me is welcome." "Jim, you can't go out there," I said. "The visibility is 0. The temperature is below freezing. You'll be dead within an hour. Better to die trying to get home than to die sitting here doing nothing," he said. "Besides, it's only 50 miles to the nearest town. If I follow the highway, I can make it." 50 miles in these conditions might as well be 50,000, Jake said. "Jim, I've been driving for 20 years. I've been through every kind of weather you can imagine. And I'm telling you, if you walk out that door, you're committing suicide." But Big Jim wasn't listening. He was already putting on his coat, already gathering his things. And I could see that he wasn't the only one. 3 other people were starting to look like they might follow him. "Jim," I said, "I can't stop you from leaving. But I need you to understand something. If you go out there and die, it's not just your life you're risking. It's the lives of everyone who might follow you. People look up to you. They respect you. If you tell them it's safe to leave, some of them are going to believe you. Then that's their choice," he said. "We're all adults here. We can make our own decisions." "No," I said, "we can't. Not anymore, because our decisions don't just affect us. They affect everyone in this room. If you leave and take 3 other people with you, that's 4 people we lose. 4 people who might have skills we need, who might have strength we need, who might have ideas we need to survive." Big Jim paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "So what are you saying? That we're prisoners here?" I'm saying we're a team, and teams don't abandon each other when things get tough. For a moment, I thought he might listen. I thought he might sit back down and give us another chance. But then he shook his head and opened the door. The wind that blew in was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just cold, it was sharp, cutting, filled with ash that made it impossible to breathe. The visibility outside was so bad that I couldn't see Jim's truck, which was parked maybe 30 feet away. "Jim, close the door," I said. "Please." He stood there for maybe 10 seconds, staring out into the gray nothing, feeling the wind tear at his clothes and the ash sting his face. Then he stepped back inside and closed the door. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. "It's like the end of the world out there. It is the end of the world," I said. "Our world, anyway. The world we knew is gone. But we're still here, and we're still alive, and we're going to stay that way." That night, as the ash storm raged outside and the temperature dropped to 16 degrees, I realized that Jake had been right. I wasn't just the guy who made coffee anymore. I was the guy who was keeping 16 other people alive. And that responsibility was about to get a lot heavier. Because by the end of day 4, when I saw the thermometer had dropped 15 degrees and the sky looked like dirty concrete, I knew we were in trouble. But I had no idea that trouble was just getting started. So there I was, a 24-year-old fast food worker, staring at 17 stranded people who were all looking at me like I had answers. The thing is, I didn't have answers, but I had something else. 6 years of experience keeping a business running when everything went wrong. Day 5, October 7th. The ash storm had passed during the night, but it left behind a world I barely recognized. Everything outside was covered in a thick gray blanket that made the parking lot look like the surface of the moon. The temperature had stabilized at 15 degrees, which sounds like good news until you realize that 15 degrees in October in Nebraska meant we were dealing with something that had never happened before in recorded history. The backup generators had been coughing and sputtering all night, and I knew we were running out of time. I'd checked the fuel levels 3 times, and at the current rate of consumption, we had maybe 2 days before they gave out completely. 2 days before we lost heat, lights, and refrigeration. 2 days before we went from being a functioning shelter to being just another cold building full of scared people. But the real challenge wasn't the generators or the food or even the temperature. The real challenge was the people. 17 individuals from completely different backgrounds, all thrown together by circumstances none of us had planned for. And somehow I had to turn them into a team. Let me tell you about these people, because understanding them is crucial to understanding how we survived. There was Jake Morrison, the long-haul trucker who'd been driving for 20 years and had become my unofficial second-in-command. Martha Collins, who drove medical supplies and had some nursing training, making her invaluable for keeping everyone healthy. Carlos Mendez, who hauled frozen goods and understood refrigeration systems better than anyone. Big Jim Patterson, who transported automotive parts and had nearly walked out into the ash storm before realizing how deadly it was outside. Then there was Linda Davis, a former teacher traveling with her 17-year-old daughter Amanda. Amanda was sharp, good with technology, and had been our lifeline to the outside world through her phone's spotty internet connection. There was Robert Chun, a business consultant who'd been traveling to a conference in Denver, and his wife Sarah, a nurse who'd been invaluable in helping Martha with medical concerns. We also had Tom Bradley, a retired military mechanic who'd been visiting family, and his knowledge of engines and mechanical systems was going to be crucial. There was Maria Santos, a hotel manager who understood logistics and crowd control. Frank Wilson, a farmer from Iowa who knew more about food storage and preservation than the rest of us combined. Betty Anderson, a retired school principal who'd become our unofficial counselor, helping people deal with the psychological stress of our situation. The younger crowd included Kevin Murphy, a college student who'd been driving home for the holidays, and Jessica Taylor, a recent graduate who'd been moving to Colorado for a new job. There was also David Kim, a software engineer who'd been able to help Amanda with the technical aspects of communication, and Michelle Rodriguez, a social worker who understood group dynamics and conflict resolution. Rounding out our group was Gary Stevens, a construction worker who'd been traveling between job sites, and his practical skills were going to be essential for maintaining our shelter. 17 people. 17 different personalities, backgrounds, and skill sets. And somehow, I had to get them all working together. "All right, everyone," I said, gathering the group around the main dining area. "We need to talk about how we're going to organize ourselves. This isn't a temporary situation anymore. We're looking at weeks, maybe months, of staying here together. And that means we need to start thinking like a community instead of like strangers who happen to be in the same place." "What do you mean?" Robert asked. "Are you talking about some kind of government or something?" "I'm talking about survival," I said. "In a restaurant, everyone has a job. The cook cooks, the server serves, the dishwasher washes dishes. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do, and when they're supposed to do it. If we're going to make it through this, we need the same kind of organization." Martha raised her hand. "Dev, what you're describing sounds like you want to be in charge of everyone. How do we know you're qualified for that?" It was a fair question, and I'd been expecting it. "You don't," I said. "But here's what I do know. I've spent 6 years managing this place during dinner rushes, equipment failures, supply shortages, and every kind of crisis you can imagine. I know how to keep people fed when we're running low on ingredients. I know how to keep the lights on when the power's flickering. I know how to keep people calm when everything's going wrong. And right now, that's what we need." "But what gives you the right to make decisions for all of us?" Big Jim asked. "Just because you work here doesn't mean you own us." "You're right," I said. "I don't own anyone. But someone has to make decisions, and someone has to coordinate our efforts. If you think someone else should be in charge, then let's talk about it. But let's do it now, before we waste any more time arguing about it." The silence that followed was telling. Everyone looked around at each other, but nobody volunteered to take on the responsibility of keeping 17 people alive in an increasingly dangerous world. "I think Dev should be in charge," Amanda said quietly. "He's the one who's been keeping us informed, keeping us fed, keeping us warm. He's the one who convinced my mom and me to stay when we wanted to leave. If it wasn't for him, we'd probably be dead by now." "I agree," said Tom, the retired mechanic. "I've seen leadership in the military, and I know it when I see it." "Dev's got the right instincts." One by one, the others agreed. Not enthusiastically, but practically. They recognized that someone had to be in charge, and I was the logical choice. "All right," I said. "But I want to be clear about something. I'm not a dictator. I'm not going to make decisions without consulting everyone. But when it comes to survival, when it comes to keeping us alive, I need to know that people will follow my lead." "Can everyone agree to that?" They could. Reluctantly, but they could. "Good. Now let's talk about organization. We need to establish shifts and responsibilities. Martha, you and Sarah are our medical team. If anyone gets hurt or sick, you're in charge of treatment. Carlos, you're our refrigeration expert. You need to keep our food storage systems running as long as possible. Tom, you're our mechanic. You need to keep the generators running and help us figure out how to extend their life." I went around the group, assigning roles based on people's skills and experience. Frank became our food preservation specialist, working with me to figure out how to make our supplies last longer. Maria took charge of housekeeping and space management, making sure our living area stayed clean and organized. Betty became our morale officer, responsible for keeping everyone's spirits up and mediating conflicts. The younger people got assignments. 2. Amanda continued as our communications coordinator, trying to maintain contact with the outside world. Kevin and Jessica were assigned to general labor, helping wherever they were needed. David worked on technical problems, trying to find ways to extend our power and communication capabilities. But even as I assigned roles and tried to sound confident, I could feel the weight of leadership settling on my shoulders. These people were depending on me to keep them alive, and I wasn't sure I was up to the task. The first real test came that afternoon when our main generator started making a grinding noise that Tom said meant the bearings were going out. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Maybe 6 hours," Tom said. "Maybe less. The ash is destroying everything mechanical it touches. I can try to clean the air filters again, but we're fighting a losing battle. 6 hours. That was the timeline I'd been dreading. 6 hours before we lost our primary power source, our heating system, and our ability to keep food from spoiling. "What are our options?" I asked. "We've got 2 backup generators," Tom said. "But they're smaller and they're having the same problems. If we're lucky, they might give us another day or 2. And then? Then we're running on whatever battery power we can scrounge up, and we're burning wood for heat." I looked around the diner at the 17 people who were depending on me to figure this out. "Tom, what would you need to keep the generators running longer?" "Clean air filters mostly. Maybe some replacement parts. But getting to an auto parts store in these conditions is impossible." "What about the vehicles in the parking lot? Could we cannibalize parts from them?" Tom's face lit up. "Actually, yeah. Some of the air filters might be compatible, and there are other parts we could use. But we'd have to work fast before the cold makes it impossible to work outside." "Do it," I said. "Take Gary and Kevin with you. Get whatever you can from the vehicles outside." While Tom worked on the generators, I tackled the food situation. Frank and I went through our entire inventory, item by item, calculating how long each item would last at different consumption rates. "The good news is we've got a lot of canned goods," Frank said. "Properly rationed, they could last us 2. "And the bad news?" "The bad news is we've got a lot of fresh food that's going to spoil once we lose refrigeration. And some of our people aren't going to handle rationing very well." He was right. I'd already noticed that some people were taking more than their share of food, assuming that someone else would figure out how to get more. That kind of thinking was going to get us all killed. "We need to implement strict rationing," I said. 3 meals a day, specific portions, no exceptions. "People aren't going to like that," Frank warned. "People don't have to like it. They just have to do it." That evening, I called another group meeting. "We need to talk about food rationing," I said. "Starting tomorrow, everyone gets 3 meals a day, but the portions are going to be smaller than what you're used to." "How much smaller?" Robert asked. "About 60% of what you'd normally eat," I said. "It's not starvation, but it's not going to be comfortable either." "This is ridiculous," Big Jim said. "We're in America, not some refugee camp. We shouldn't have to ration food." "Jim, we're rationing food because we want to stay alive," I said. "If we eat everything we have in the next 2 weeks, then what? We can't go to the grocery store. We can't call for delivery. What we have is what we have." "But there's got to be food somewhere," Linda said. "Farms, warehouses, distribution centers. We can't be the only people trying to survive." "You're right," I said. "There probably is food out there. But getting to it is the problem. The roads are impassable, the vehicles are breaking down, and the weather is getting worse every day." "So what's your plan?" Martha asked. "Just sit here and hope for the best. My plan is to keep us alive until we can figure out a better option," I said. "And that means making hard decisions about food, about heat, about everything else." As if to emphasize the point, the lights flickered and dimmed. Tom's voice came from the kitchen. "Main generator just died. We're on backup power now." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone realized that we just lost our primary power source, our main heating system, and our ability to keep food refrigerated. How long do the backup generators last? Betty asked. Maybe 36 hours, Tom called out. Maybe less. 36 hours, that was our new timeline. 36 hours to figure out how to heat the building, how to preserve our food, how to keep 17 people alive in sub-zero temperatures. All right, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is what we're going to do. Tom, Gary, and Kevin, you're going to work on extending the life of the backup generators. Martha and Sarah, you're going to help people prepare for colder temperatures. Everyone else, we're going to start moving our sleeping area closer to the kitchen, where the residual heat from the stoves will help keep us warm. As people started moving around, following their assignments, I caught Amanda looking at her phone with a worried expression. What is it? I asked. I finally got another signal, she said. I found a government website with emergency information. What does it say? It says that anyone in the affected areas should shelter in place and wait for rescue. It says that FEMA is coordinating relief efforts and that help is on the way. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe we weren't alone. Maybe help was coming. When was this posted? I asked. Amanda checked the date. 3 days ago. 3 days. The same day our main problem started. Which meant the government was working with outdated information, making promises they probably couldn't keep. Amanda, I said, keep monitoring for updates. But don't tell anyone about this yet. Not until we know more. Why not? This is good news, isn't it? It might be. But it might also be false hope. And right now, we can't afford to have people thinking rescue is coming when it might not be. That night, as the backup generators hummed and wheezed and the temperature outside dropped to 12 degrees, I realized that we were completely on our own. No government agency was coming to save us. No rescue team was going to show up with food and supplies. We had to save ourselves. And that's when I started working on the plan that would either save us all or get us killed. Because I'd been thinking about this wrong from the beginning. I'd been thinking about survival as a temporary problem, something we just had to endure. Until things got back to normal. But normal wasn't coming back. This was our new reality, and we needed to start planning for the long term. I spent the night going through every piece of information I had about the surrounding area. Every farm, every warehouse, every distribution center within 50 miles. I knew where the food was stored, where the supplies were kept, where the equipment was located. The problem was getting to it. But I had an idea. A crazy, dangerous idea that would require every person in our group to work together. An idea that would either give us the resources we needed to survive the winter, or get us all killed trying. That's when I heard something on the CB radio that made my blood run cold. A voice from a truck stop 50 miles east, screaming about people freezing to death on the highway, then static. Nothing but static. And I knew that in a few hours, some of my people were going to want to walk out that door into the same death trap. Day 8. That's when I learned the difference between being a shift supervisor and being responsible for keeping people alive. Because on day 8, I had to make decisions that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The backup generators had been running for 3 days since our main generator died, and Tom's prediction had been optimistic. Instead of 36 hours, we'd managed to squeeze out 72 hours by constantly cleaning air filters and cannibalizing parts from the vehicles in the parking lot. But even Tom's mechanical genius had limits, and those limits were about to be reached. Dev, you need to see this, Tom called from the generator shed behind the building. I followed him outside and immediately regretted it. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees, and the wind cut through my jacket like it was made of paper. The ash had mixed with snow overnight, creating a gray slush that made walking treacherous. The second backup generator seized up about an hour ago, Tom said, pointing to a silent machine that looked like it had been through a war. Bearing failure probably caused by ash contamination. I can't fix it without replacement parts we don't have. What about the third generator? Still running, but barely. Listen to it. I could hear what he meant. Instead of the steady hum I'd gotten used to, the remaining generator was making irregular coughing sounds, like an old man trying to clear his throat. How long? I asked. Maybe 6 hours, maybe less. The air filter is completely clogged, and I've already cleaned it. 4 times today. There's nothing left to clean. 6 hours. That was our new deadline. 6 hours before we lost power completely, before the temperature inside the building started dropping toward the 8 degrees it was outside, before our food started freezing and our water pipes burst. Tom, I need you to be honest with me. Is there any way to keep power running past those 6 hours? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dying generator. There might be one option, a really bad option. Tell me. We could burn the furniture. The tables, chairs, anything wooden. Set up a fire in the dining area. Use the existing ventilation system to manage the smoke. It wouldn't give us electricity, but it would give us heat. For how long? Maybe a week if we're careful. But Dev, burning furniture indoors is dangerous. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Structure fires, smoke inhalation. We'd be trading hypothermia for a dozen other ways to die. I stared at the generator, listening to its labored breathing, and felt the weight of 17 lives pressing down on my shoulders. In 6 hours, I was going to have to tell people that we were about to lose power, heat, and light. That we were about to enter a phase of survival that would make the past week look comfortable. When we got back inside, I could see that people were starting to sense the crisis coming. The lights had been dimming throughout the day, and the heating system was struggling to keep the building warm. People were wearing coats indoors, huddling together for warmth, speaking in low voices like they were at a funeral. Dev, Martha approached me as I was checking our food supplies. We need to talk about Robert. Robert Chun, the business consultant, who'd been traveling to Denver. What about him? He's been talking to some of the others about leaving. He thinks we should try to reach the nearest town before the weather gets worse. I felt my stomach drop. How many others? Sarah, his wife. Kevin, the college student. Maybe David, the software engineer. He's got them convinced that staying. Here is a death sentence. 4 people. If Robert convinced 4 people to leave, that would be a quarter of our group. 4 people with skills we needed. 4 people who might not survive the journey. 4 people whose deaths would haunt the rest of us. Where is he now? In the back booth with the others. They've been planning for the past hour. I walked over to where Robert and his group were sitting. They had maps spread out on the table, and Robert was pointing to what looked like a route to the nearest town. Robert, I said, sitting down across from him, I hear you're thinking about leaving. He looked up, and I could see the determination in his eyes. We've been talking, and we think it's time to try for civilization. The nearest town is only 20 miles south. If we follow Highway 30, we should be able to make it in a day, maybe 2. In 8-degree weather, through ash and snow? Without proper winter gear? We've got coats, Sarah said. And we can wrap up in blankets. People have walked 20 miles before. Not in these conditions, I said. Robert, I need you to understand something. The temperature out there isn't just cold, it's deadly cold. Without proper insulation, without shelter, without a way to stay dry, you'll be hypothermic within hours. But staying here is just waiting to die slowly, Kevin said. The generators are failing, the food is running out, and nobody's coming to help us. At least if we try to walk out, we have a chance. I looked around the table at their faces. They weren't stupid people. They weren't panicking. They'd thought this through, weighed the options, and decided that risking death by freezing was better than waiting for certain death by starvation or exposure. What if I told you I had a plan? I said. What if I told you there was a way to keep us alive here, to get more supplies to survive the winter? We'd say you're dreaming, Robert said. Dev, I respect what you've done for us. You've kept us alive for 8 days, and that's more than most people could have managed. But this place is a dead end. We need to try for something better. And if you're wrong, if you don't make it to town, if you freeze to death on the highway, then at least we'll have tried, Sarah said. At least we'll have died doing something, instead of just sitting here waiting. I could see the logic in their thinking, and that scared me more than anything. When rational people start making irrational decisions, it means the situation has become truly desperate. Give me until tomorrow. Morning, I said. Give me 12 hours to show you my plan. If you still want to leave after that, I won't try to stop you. Why should we wait? Robert asked. Because, I said, if my plan works, it could save all of us. And if it doesn't work, you'll still have the option to leave. But once you walk out that door, you can't come back. They agreed to wait, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They thought I was stalling, trying to talk them out of a decision they'd already made. And maybe I was. But I was also buying time to finalize the most dangerous plan I'd ever conceived. That evening, as the last generator wheezed and struggled, I gathered the entire group together. It was time to tell them the truth about our situation, and it was time to reveal the plan I'd been working on since day 3. I need everyone to listen carefully, I said. In about 4 hours, we're going to lose power completely. The last generator is dying, and Tom can't fix it. That means no electricity, no heat, no refrigeration. The silence that followed was heavy with fear and resignation. People had been expecting this moment, but hearing it confirmed was still a shock. However, I continued, that doesn't mean we're going to die. It just means we need to change our strategy. What kind of strategy? Big Jim asked. We're going to raid the distribution center 15 miles north of here. More silence. Then nervous laughter. From a few people who thought I was joking. Dev, you can't be serious, Martha said. Even if we could get there, even if there are supplies, that's breaking and entering. That's looting. Martha, the world ended 8 days ago. Property laws don't apply when you're trying to stay alive. But how would we even get there? Linda asked. The vehicles in the parking lot barely run, and most of them won't start at all. We're going to take Jake's truck. It's the biggest, most reliable vehicle we have, and Jake knows these roads better than anyone. All eyes turned to Jake, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. Dev, my truck's been sitting in that ash for 8 days. I don't even know if it'll start. We're going to find out. Tomorrow morning, Tom and Gary are going to work on getting it running. We're going to load it with as many people as it can safely carry, and we're going to make a supply run. This is insane, Robert said. You're talking about risking people's lives on a truck that might not even start to raid a building that might not have anything useful in weather that could kill us all. Robert, you're right. It is insane. It's also our only option. Because staying here without power, without heat, without refrigeration, that's not survival. That's just a slower way to die. I pulled out the maps I'd been studying for days. The Heartland Distribution Center is 15 miles north on Highway 30. It's a major food distribution hub that services truck stops and restaurants across 3 states. I've been there dozens of times for supply runs. I know the layout, I know what they keep in stock, and I know they have backup generators and emergency supplies. How do you know it hasn't been looted already? David asked. I don't. But I know it's worth the risk. If we can get there and back with even a fraction of what they normally stock, we can survive for months instead of days. And if we can't get back, Kevin asked, if the truck breaks down, or we get stuck in the snow, or any of 100 other things go wrong, then some of us die trying to live instead of all of us dying from giving up. Frank, the farmer, leaned forward. Dev, I've lived through bad winters before. I've seen what happens when people get desperate. But I've also seen what happens when people work together, when they take calculated risks to survive. What you're proposing, it's dangerous, but it's not stupid. I agree, said Tom. I can probably get Jake's truck running. It won't be pretty and it won't be reliable, but for one trip, it might hold together. How many people would go? Amanda asked. 6, myself, Jake to drive, Tom for mechanical support, Gary for muscle, Frank for food expertise, and one more person for security. I'll go, said Big Jim. I don't like this plan, but if you're doing it, you'll need someone who's not afraid of hard work. This is madness, Robert said, standing up. You're going to get people killed for supplies that might not even be there. Robert, you might be right, but what's the alternative? Stay here and freeze to death? Walk 20 miles through sub-zero weather and hope we make it to town? At least my plan gives us a chance to improve our situation instead of just surviving it. When would you go? Sarah asked. Tomorrow. As soon as Tom gets the truck running. We'll leave at first light, make the run, and get back before dark. One day, in and out. That night, as the last generator finally gave up and died, plunging us into darkness and cold, I lay awake thinking about the plan I just committed to. 6 people, including myself, were going to risk their lives tomorrow on a journey that had maybe a 50% chance of success. If we succeeded, we'd have enough supplies to survive the winter. If we failed, we'd probably die, and the people we left behind would be in an even worse situation. But as I listened to the wind howling outside and felt the temperature dropping inside the building, I knew we had no choice. Staying put meant certain death. The supply run meant possible death, but also possible salvation. The question was whether I had the right to risk other people's lives on my plan, whether I had the authority to make decisions that could get people killed, whether being a fast food supervisor had prepared me for the kind of leadership that involved life and death choices. Around midnight, Robert and his group made their decision. I heard them moving around in the darkness, gathering their things. Preparing to leave. Robert, I called out softly. You don't have to do this. Wait until tomorrow. See if our supply run works. Dev, he said, I respect what you're trying to do. But Sarah and I have been married for 15 years. If we're going to die, we want to die together, trying to get home. Not sitting in a truck stop waiting for someone else to save us. I understood. I didn't agree with their decision, but I understood it. Sometimes people need to feel like they're in control of their own fate, even when that control is an illusion. They left at 1 o'clock in the morning. 4 people walking out into 8-degree weather with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the hope that they could cover 20 miles before the cold ended their lives. I watched them disappear into the darkness and knew I'd probably never see them again. 13 people left. 13 people depending on me to either bring back supplies that would keep us alive or to pass away trying. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but it was also clarifying. I knew what I had to do, and I knew the risks involved. That's when I realized I'd been thinking about this all wrong. I wasn't just trying to keep us alive for a few days until help came. Help wasn't coming. The government wasn't coming. We were on our own, and I had to tell 13 people that I was their only hope of seeing spring again. Tomorrow, I was going to find out if 6 years of managing dinner rushes and equipment failures had prepared me to lead a life or death mission into a frozen wasteland. And if I was wrong, if my plan failed, 13 people were going to pass away because they trusted a fast food worker to save them. But I discovered something about myself over the past 8 days. When everything falls apart, when people are scared and desperate and looking for someone to follow, the skills that matter aren't the ones society values most. They're the practical skills, the everyday skills, The skills you learn by serving others and solving problems under pressure. Day 11. This is it. The moment when everything I'd learned slinging burgers and managing dinner rushes either saved us all or ended our lives. Because I was about to reveal the plan I'd been working on since day one. The temperature inside the diner had dropped to 32 degrees overnight. Without the generators, without any source of heat except our own body warmth, we were slowly freezing to death in our own shelter. People were wearing every piece of clothing they had, huddled together under blankets, their breath visible in the air as they spoke in whispers to conserve energy. Tom had worked on Jake's truck until 3 in the morning, and somehow, against all odds, he'd gotten it running. The engine sounded rough, like it was gargling gravel, but it was running. We had one shot at this supply run, one chance to get to the Heartland Distribution Center and back before the truck gave out completely. "All right, everyone," I said, gathering the remaining 13 people around what used to be our meeting area. "Today's the day. Jake, Tom, Gary, Frank, Big Jim and I are going to make the supply run. The rest of you are going to stay here and keep the building secure." "Dev," Martha said, "I still think this is too dangerous. What if something happens to the truck? What if you get stuck? What if the distribution center is empty? Then we'll figure something else out," I said. "But Martha, staying here isn't an option anymore. We've got maybe 2 days of food left, no heat, no power, and the temperature is still dropping. If we don't get supplies today, we're all going to pass away anyway." "What if Robert and his group were right?" Amanda asked quietly. "What if we should have tried to walk to town instead?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Robert, Sarah, Kevin, and David had been gone for 10 hours now, and none of us knew if they'd made it to safety or if they'd frozen to death on the highway. Their absence was a constant reminder that every decision we made could be the difference between life and death. "Maybe they were right," I said. "Maybe walking to town was the better choice. But we made our decision, and now we have to live with it or pass away with it." I pulled out the detailed plan I'd been working on for days. "Here's how this is going to work. We leave at 7 o'clock sharp. The trip to the distribution center should take about 40 minutes if the roads are passable. We spend no more than 2 hours loading supplies. Then we come straight back. Total trip time, 4 hours maximum." "What kind of supplies are we looking for?" Frank asked. "Food first. Canned goods, dried goods, anything with a long shelf life. Water if we can find it, but food is the priority. Then heating supplies. Propane, kerosene, anything that burns. Clean. Finally, medical supplies and tools." "What about weapons?" Big Jim asked. "If other people are raiding the same places, we might need to defend ourselves." I'd been dreading this question, but I'd known it was coming. "We're not looking for trouble, Jim. If we encounter other survivors, we try to avoid them. If we can't avoid them, we try to negotiate. Fighting is the last resort." "Dev, that's naive," Gary said. "People are desperate out there. If they see us loading supplies, they're going to want them for themselves." "Maybe, but starting a fight over supplies is a good way to get people killed. Our advantage isn't firepower, it's knowledge. I know the layout of that distribution center. I know where everything is stored. I know the fastest way in and out, and I know how to move efficiently. Speed and stealth are better than guns." Jake stood up, stretching his back. "Dev's right. I've been in plenty of tight spots on the road, and the smart drivers are the ones who avoid trouble, not the ones who go looking for it." Tom checked his watch. "We should get moving. I want to test the truck before we commit to the full trip." The 6 of us bundled up in every piece of warm clothing we could find. It wasn't proper winter gear, but it was better than nothing. We had blankets, extra socks, hand warmers that Amanda had found in her car, and thermoses of hot coffee that Martha had made using the last of our propane. "Before we go," I said to the group, I need everyone to understand something. If we don't come back by nightfall, don't try to rescue us. Don't send a search party. Don't risk anyone else's life. Just focus on keeping yourselves alive until spring. Don't talk like that, Betty said. You're coming back. You have to come back. I hope so. But if something goes wrong, if the truck breaks down or we get trapped, I need to know that the rest of you will be okay. Martha, you're in charge while I'm gone. Linda, help her keep everyone organized. Michelle, keep people's spirits up. Amanda, keep monitoring the radio for any signs of rescue. The truck started on the third try, belching black smoke and making sounds no vehicle should make. But it was running, and that was all that mattered. Dev, Amanda called out as we're climbing into the truck. Be careful. We need you to come back. We will, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The first part of the journey was the worst. The roads were covered in a mixture of ash, snow, and ice that made driving treacherous. Jake had to keep the speed under 20 miles per hour, and even then, the truck slipped and slid on every turn. The visibility was terrible, with ash clouds drifting across the highway like gray fog. But as we got further from the truck stop, I started to see signs that we weren't the only ones trying to survive. Abandoned vehicles dotted the roadside, some with their doors open, like people had just walked away. We passed a farmhouse with smoke coming from the chimney, proof that someone inside was still alive. There was even a hand-painted sign on a barn that read, "Survivors welcome, food available." Should we stop? Tom asked, pointing to the sign. Not yet, I said. Let's see what we can find at the distribution center first. We can check back here on the way home if we need to. The Heartland Distribution Center was a massive complex of warehouses and loading docks that normally serviced hundreds of trucks. Every day, as we approached, I could see that the parking lot was almost empty except for a few abandoned vehicles and what looked like several trucks that had broken down trying to leave. Looks quiet, Jake said. Too quiet, Big Jim muttered. This place should be crawling with people looking for supplies. Maybe that's good news, Gary said. Maybe it means there's still stuff to find. We parked near the main entrance, and I could immediately see why other people might have avoided this place. The front doors had been chained shut, and there were official-looking signs posted warning about trespassing and federal regulations. Most people would have seen those signs and moved on, looking for easier targets. But I knew something most people didn't. The delivery entrance around back wasn't secured the same way, and I had contacts inside who'd told me about the emergency procedures. This way, I said, leading the group around to the loading docks. The loading bay doors were locked, but not chained. Tom and Gary worked together to force one of them open, and we found ourselves in a cavernous warehouse filled with pallets of food, supplies, and equipment. Sweet mother of pearl, Frank whispered. Look at all this stuff. It was like finding treasure. Pallets of canned goods stacked 20 feet high. Cases of bottled water, boxes of medical supplies, propane tanks, portable heaters. Everything we needed to survive the winter was right there, waiting for us. All right, we've got 2 hours, I said. Frank, focus on non-perishable food. Tom and Gary, look for heating supplies and fuel. Jim, help me load cases of water. Jake, keep the truck running and watch for trouble. For the next hour and 45 minutes, we worked like our lives depended on it. Because they did. We loaded case after case of canned vegetables, soup, beans, and meat. We found boxes of rice, pasta, and dried goods that would last for months. We discovered a section of camping and emergency supplies that included sleeping bags, water purification tablets, and first aid kits. But the real prize was in the back corner of the warehouse. A section marked emergency services that contained military surplus rations, portable generators, and enough fuel to keep them running for weeks. "Dev, you need to see this," Tom called from behind a stack of pallets. I followed his voice and found him standing in front of a collection of equipment I'd only dreamed of. Portable solar panels, battery banks, radio equipment, even a shortwave radio that could potentially reach emergency services. "We can't take all of this," I said. "The truck's already loaded to capacity. We don't need all of it," Tom said. "But the solar panels and batteries, those could give us power indefinitely. And the radio equipment might let us contact other survivors, maybe even the government." "Load what you can," I said. "Priority goes to food and heat, but if there's room, take the electronics." As we were finishing up, Jake's voice came from outside. "Dev, we've got company." I ran to the loading dock and saw what he meant. Another truck was pulling into the parking lot, moving slowly and deliberately. It was bigger than ours, and I could see several people in the cab. "What do we do?" Gary asked. "We finish loading and we leave," I said. "We don't know if they're friendly or hostile, and we can't afford to find out the hard way." But as the other truck got closer, I could see that it wasn't a threat. It was a convoy of survivors, just like us. Families, children, elderly people, all crammed into a truck that looked like it was held together with duct tape and prayers. The driver of the other truck got out and walked toward us. He was a middle-aged man in a National Guard uniform, but he didn't look official. He looked like someone who'd been through hell and was barely holding it together. "Are you folks raiding this place?" he asked. "We're surviving," I said. "Same as you, I guess." "Fair enough. I'm Sergeant Williams. I've got 23 people in that truck, including 8 kids. We've been driving for 3 days looking for supplies." "Where did you come from?" "Colorado Springs. The city's gone. No power, no heat, no government. People are dying by the thousands. We headed east hoping to find someplace better." My heart sank. Colorado Springs was a major city with military installations and emergency resources. If it had collapsed completely, what hope did smaller communities have? "What's it like out there?" Jake asked. "Bad, real bad. The highways are clogged with abandoned vehicles. Most of the towns we've passed are empty or burning. The few people we've encountered, most of them, are barely hanging on." "Have you heard anything from the federal government? Any word about rescue operations?" Sergeant Williams laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, the federal government has its hands full trying to keep Washington, D.C. from freezing to death. They're not coming to help folks like us. We're on our own." It was the confirmation of what I'd suspected for days, but hearing it from someone in uniform made it real. No rescue was coming. No government agency was going to save us. We were truly on our own. "Listen," Williams said, "there's enough supplies in this place for all of us. What do you say we work together? Share the load, share the information?" I looked at my team, and I could see they were thinking the same thing I was. 23 more people meant 23 more mouths to feed. But it also meant 23 more pairs of hands, more skills, more knowledge. "Where are you planning to go?" I asked. We were hoping to find a place to hole up for the winter. Somewhere defensible, with good access to supplies. "You folks seem to have your act together. Got any suggestions?" I thought about our truck. Stop, about the 13 people waiting for us to return. About the strategic location and the potential for long-term survival. "Maybe," I said. "But we need to get back to our people first. Make sure they're okay, get these supplies distributed. Then we can talk about long-term plans." "Fair enough. Mind if we follow you? Strength in numbers, and all that." I agreed, and 20 minutes later we had a convoy heading back toward the truck stop. Our truck loaded with enough supplies to last months, followed by Williams' truck, full of survivors who might become our neighbors, our allies, or our competition. The return trip took longer because of the added weight and the need to keep the convoy together, but we made it back just as the sun was starting to set. I could see smoke coming from the truck stop's chimney, which meant Martha had figured out how to get the wood-burning fireplace working. As we pulled into the parking lot, people came streaming out of the building. Amanda, Linda, Betty, Martha, all of them looking relieved and excited and hopeful for the first time in days. "Did you find supplies?" Martha called out as I climbed out of the truck. "We found everything," I said. "Food, fuel, medical supplies, even some equipment that might let us get power back online. And we found these folks," Jake said, gesturing to William's truck. "Might be we're not as alone as we thought." Over the next few hours, we unloaded supplies, made introductions, and started planning for what came next. 36 people total now, including children and elderly folks who would need special care. It was a lot of mouths to feed, but it was also a real community with all the skills and knowledge we'd need to survive. As I watched people working together, sharing food, sharing stories, sharing hope, I realized that something fundamental had changed. We weren't just a group of strangers thrown together by circumstance anymore. We were a community. A family almost. Frank had been right about the food lasting longer when properly rationed. Tom had been right about the solar panels giving us renewable power. Williams had been right about there being strength in numbers. And I'd been right about the distribution center having everything we needed. But more than that, I'd been right about something else. The skills that mattered in this new world weren't the ones society had valued before. They were the everyday skills, the practical skills, the skills you learned by serving others and solving problems under pressure. "Dev," Amanda said, sitting down next to me as I watched the sunset through the ash-filled sky. "What happens now?" "Now we survive the winter," I said. "We figure out how to turn this truck stop into a permanent settlement. We establish trade relationships with other survivor communities. We plant crops in the spring. We build something better than what we lost. You really think we can do that?" "Amanda, 12 days ago, I was just a fast food worker complaining about broken equipment and difficult customers. Today I'm responsible for keeping 36 people alive in conditions nobody could have imagined. If I can do that, we can do anything." The radio crackled to life and William's voice came through. "Dev, you might want to hear this. I'm picking up a signal from a group about 100 miles south. They're establishing what they're calling a survivor network, sharing information and resources between communities. A survivor network. The idea sent a thrill through me. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building. We were connecting. We were creating something new from the ashes of the old world. That night, as people settled into sleeping arrangements that somehow accommodated 36 people in a space designed for maybe 20, I reflected on everything that had happened. The eruption, the ash clouds, the temperature drops, the equipment failures, the difficult decisions, the dangerous supply run. But most of all, I thought about the moment when I realized that my 6 years of managing a truck stop diner had prepared me for something I never could have imagined. Not just keeping people fed during busy shifts, but keeping them alive when the world ended. People had always looked down on fast food workers, like we were just flipping burgers and taking orders, like our jobs didn't matter, like we weren't contributing anything important to society. But when the world ended, it turned out that knowing how to feed people under pressure, manage limited resources, and keep operations running 24 hours a day was exactly what humanity needed. I'm still Devin Hutchins, and I'm still feeding people. The only difference is now I'm doing it at the end of the world. The radio says this winter could last years, but I've got my crew, I've got my plan, and I've got something else. The knowledge that when everything falls apart, the people who know how to serve others are the ones who survive. So that's how a fast food worker survived the first 12 days of the Ice Age apocalypse. Not by being the strongest or the smartest, but by understanding something everyone else missed. That keeping people fed, organized, and working together isn't just about serving customers. It's about keeping humanity alive. The world ended, but we didn't. And as long as I'm breathing, we're going to keep going, one meal at a time. This is just the beginning.